integrado por Gabriel Zucman, que se queda en el escenario. Voy a pedir al señor Branko Milanović, please join us here. Y me surgía la duda presentando este diálogo si esto ha pasado ya antes, si ellos dos se han juntado para hablar. Y seguro que no se han juntado, casi me atrevo a decir, con la persona que les va a moderar y hacer las preguntas, que es Mónica Martínez Bravo. Por favor, Mónica. Mónica ya la conocéis, pero ella es una brillante profesora investigadora. Y digo lo de valiente porque decidió cambiar el mundo de la investigación por ensuciarse las manos y bajar al terreno de la política económica, así que va a ser un debate muy interesante. Gracias a los tres.
Gracias. Muchas gracias, Rebeca. Thank you so much. So we're standing between lunch, so I'll try to be brief, but I think it's a great opportunity to have two of the main economists which try to push for a more progressive view of economics in the audience, and I would like to ask you some questions. So first, I would like to bring you to the European context. There is a growing evidence internationally on the adverse effects of inequality on economic growth and in productivity, but two relatively recent important reports by Enrico Letta and Mario Draghi that try to address the competitiveness of the European economy seem to not emphasize enough policies that would reduce inequality. So I wanted to ask you whether to think that this is a next step into the agenda and whether there is a scope to put policies that would enhance inequality at the core of the competitiveness debate in Europe.
I think Gabriel will.
I think that when you look at the long-run evolution of European economies, or the world economy really, what you see is that what's been the core engine of economic growth, of development, of prosperity, has been the mass investment, public investment in education, in healthcare, in public infrastructure that allow private companies to be productive. And what's extraordinary with Europe, with the European development model, it is that it has been able to reach the highest levels of productivity in the world. If you look at Scandinavian economies, if you look at Germany, France, Spain, we are all close to the highest level of productivity, but in a much more equal manner than the US, which also has high productivity but is much more unequal. And so the challenge for the European Union is how do we continue and how do we build on that and go even further, right? So it's not that there is a trade-off between growth, productivity on the one hand and equality on the other. The big lesson of history is that we have been successful at being both the most productive and, if you look at Scandinavian countries, the most equal countries on the planet. And we have to do this and to keep pushing in that direction, and that means more investment in education, in infrastructure, in health, in the energy transition.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So let me now turn to Branko on the point of a more international agenda. As a few minutes ago, the Spanish president announced there is an effort to put inequality in the international agenda with this announcement of taking to the UN Assembly the creation of this international panel. While on the other hand, if we think about who is sometimes losing faith on the claim of redistribution as a hope for a brighter future, is really the working class in many countries, which are some fraction of them losing trust in institutions and promoting a more conservative view of lowering taxes. So the question would be like, how do you see this panel being able to speak more directly and to connect with the needs of those people that have traditionally wanted to promote a more equal world and that now seems to have other things in mind?
Well, of course, it's a very difficult question. Let me try to break it into two parts, you know. The first part, I do think that the panel's importance will be essentially to bring some of these issues that Gabriel was speaking before to a larger audience, because we have not to forget that there is a huge disproportion in power. In other words, we are talking here with a small group of people. There are, I don't know, 10 researchers, 15 researchers, whereas people who are actually helping those billionaires and millionaires, high taxes, write their own, you know, trusts and wills and all that, are many. They're actually sort of working very hard to actually pay as least as possible. So we have this proportion in power. And I think to some extent the panel, by making it more publicly known, would sort of not balance fully, but make it less unequal compared to what it is. Because I think it is, to some extent, I do actually wish that this movement would succeed, but there is a sort of, to speak of Spain, a quixotic part of this movement because of the disproportion in power. In that sense, I think that the panel would actually be very helpful. Now, on the second question of how can people who were traditionally supporting like lower inequality, and now they might be actually very much anti-immigration or actually even for low taxation, I think this is a difficult problem because there has been, of course, big change in the type of societies that we had like 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and today. You know, the working class, or what used to be considered like the working class, has now been much more fragmented. It has become different. It is employed in much smaller enterprises. There is no single objective that many people like share. If you had like old-fashioned enterprises with 4,000 people, there is a very clear objective that they have. Now it is much more difficult. There is much greater competition, so competition with abroad. So I think this is a political issue that is not easily solvable.
Very good. Would you like Professor Zucman to comment on that?
No, I think that it's important to take seriously something that we have tended to forget for some time after World War II, when extreme wealth had kind of disappeared in Europe, which is the fundamental tension that exists in democratic societies between extreme wealth on the one hand and the very possibility of a well-functioning democracy on the other hand. This is a topic that all the thinkers of democracy have written about back to Aristotle. But in 1950s, 60s, 70s, after the shocks of the world wars and the depression, when extreme wealth had disappeared, people had forgotten about that. And so we still lack the institutions today, the policies that are going to allow us to deal rationally with this tension, to make sure that our institutions, our policies, our media, our elections, our public conversation is not captured by a very small fraction of overwhelmingly wealthy individuals. So this is for me a fundamental challenge, and this is an area where we need to innovate. We don't have a recipe that we could apply from the past. The wealth taxes that have existed in Europe had all sorts of deficiencies, and to make it short, none of them ever did a good job at taxing the truly super rich who were exempt for different reasons. We need to innovate, we need to invent, and so I think it's very important to have a panel like that today where we can think together about, okay, what needs to be invented? What are the new tools and new institutions that we need to elaborate collectively?
Very good. So I completely agree on this need of pushing for this agenda. And this reminds me this quote that I also wrote here by the U.S. Supreme Court, Louis Brandeis, who said, we can have democracy or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of the few, but we cannot have both, right? So on that line of pushing for policies that would really tackle this high inequality, I think that you described very, very clearly your proposal for the wealth tax. I wanted to ask you about a question very related to a wealth tax, because as has been said, Spain is one of the few countries that have a wealth tax with some limitations. Of course, there are some business assets exemptions which actually make this own tax regressive within the very top taxpayers of this precise tax. But on top of that, this tax is set at the regional level in Spain by autonomous communities. Instead, I'm a representative of Catalonia. I think it's an important angle to put in the table. And of course, in a setting where regional governments, especially Catalonia and a few others, we're really keen on protecting our competencies in terms of taxation or any other. So that, to some extent, also recreates in a within-country setting some of the coordination global problems that you have addressed and you have pointed out of how to solve. But what would be kind of the recommendations in a regionally decentralized tax setting context in which many regions we want to keep our competencies to regulate and to have differential policies?
So two things. Number one, we need cooperation. We are not going to be able to safeguard democracy, to tackle those very big problems if we are just divided and competing against each other and there is no coordination whatsoever. So we need to help each other to affirm our basic principles of equality before the law, equality before the tax law. Now, number two, how do you do that in practice? What's really important in any system, whether it's national or international, is to have what you could call a tax collector of last resort. Meaning, at the end of the day, billionaires, no matter where they live, whether it's in Catalonia, whether it's in Madrid, whether it's the Cayman Islands, they've become extremely rich through the cooperation of thousands of people building on infrastructure, on public goods, on education, on knowledge that has been accumulated by over centuries, over millennia, by all of humanity. So they have a duty towards all of humanity, right? So they have to pay something, a minimum, somewhere. If it's not their residence, country, or region, or municipality that taxes them, fine. There has to be a tax collector of last resort. So it could be the central government in Spain. At the international level, it could be, I think it should be the country where they have built their wealth, meaning where they've spent a lot of time. But there has to be one government that says, we respect the fiscal autonomy and sovereignty of other nations and other governments. They are free to do whatever they want. But if they choose not to tax their billionaires, that's their right, but we will collect the taxes that they choose not to collect, so that there is this basic floor and you can't secede from the planet.
Very good, very provocative. I think that that opens the room for thinking about innovative policies in taxation in a decentralized setting. So I also wanted to ask both of you, let me turn to Professor Milanović, on the pre-production policies to lower inequality. We have been talking today a lot about taxation, but there are other things that have been set in the agenda, such as setting higher minimum wages, promoting the role of labor unions, but also even directly some form of industrial policy where some sectors are regulated or promoting. Do we have good evidence, good economic science to guide on those policy debates, or are we still on the infancy of how to guide these processes?
Well, first let me say something to go back to the policy, to the wealth taxation. I think that actually Gabriel has, of course, given very good arguments in favor of that. But as I was saying before, I think that we have to add a moralistic element to it. We have had such an incredible accumulation of wealth that is, sort of, particularly in the last 10 years approximately in the US, that really sort of dwarfs in the size and scope even what happened during the 1920s. So it is something really new. And on top of that, these people have very actively moved into the political space and into the media space. And these spaces are very interconnected, as we see. So I think, to some extent, there is a moral element that I mentioned, but there is also an element of self-defense of society, because when these elements, the power of the media and the power of lobbying and the power of political action become sort of joined, it is very difficult to actually unseat them from these positions. And consequently, I think I see the tax also as a way of trying to do that, and I see it, especially, I even mentioned that it may be even directed more sort of strongly towards activities where very rich people get involved and buy media outlets, platforms, newspapers, and other things, or contribute to the political campaigns. So I think that we are really dealing now with a new issue that was not, at least in my opinion, was not as evident as, maybe 10 years ago, but has now really become very big. To answer your question, I think that the usual policies that we talked about, I think we have quite a lot of evidence when people say, what should we do to reduce inequality? And the answer is not particularly difficult, because we know that. Increase social transfers, increase taxation, much better public education, much better health system. This is inheritance taxation. This kind of has been known. Now, the new policies, I really don't know about that. I don't know how the policies which have to do with more industrial policies, how they would work. I actually don't see whether the people would, sort of new people, of course, would come, and whether you can reindustrialize some sectors. I think for me it's too early to say whether that would happen. To some extent it looks like a little bit an attempt to recreate 1950s or the 1960s. I'm doubtful that that would succeed, because the situation then was very different from today, but I think it's too early to say. But for the other policies, I don't think there is any doubt. We have seen them work in numerous instances. The question is whether there is a political will to do that.
Very good. I also want to translate the question to Professor Zucman. In a sense, the bottom line question would be, should we care about who gets capital gains? I mean, I remember when I was studying economics in one of the lectures, I was questioning this to the professor because they said, oh, it doesn't matter who gets the capital gains, if it's the small farm landowner or if it's the big farm, because there are perfect capital markets, and if you try to differentiate between them, you will create an inefficiency. But when you see the massive task of redistributing, wealth, and how with taxation we might have limited aims, shall we start caring? Is economics moving in that direction, or is this taking us back to the 1950s, and we should not go that way?
I think today it's impossible not to care. Even economists have to care about the distribution of income and wealth, and many of them for a long time, after World War II, in a period when what obsessed economists was whether the market economy or the planned economy was more efficient, and at that time they didn't care, most of them with some exceptions of course, about distributional questions. But today in 2026, it's impossible not to care. It's impossible not to realize that extreme wealth is always an extreme power. Power to influence the prevailing ideology, the power to influence markets by buying competitors, the power to influence elections, and so we have to grapple, and everybody does. And I think 6, 7, 8 years ago, you could still find economists who said, no, this does not exist. Whether wealth is distributed in that way or this way does not matter. If we have perfect capital markets, this is all going to sort out. But today, in light of what's happening all over the world, and in particular in the extreme case, which is the US, I don't think that anybody believes seriously anymore in that outdated worldview.
Yeah. I agree. I think actually it is, I was saying also before, I think it is a different situation now. I think that people who are actually talking about only efficiency, and actually even efficiency equity trade-off are really now in a minority. They are on the defensive. This is actually happening, and we should even talk more likely not a trade-off, but one sort of equity contributing to efficiency. I think that we have much stronger arguments for that than the opposite. So they are definitely on the defensive. There are many reasons, including the 2008 crisis and then all the other problems that happened. So they are clearly on the defensive. And even when you look, actually, recently, I have to just very briefly to mention the paper that I did with Marco Rinaldi. We looked at how the increased share of capital, which we see in national accounts, can we actually see it in surveys and other instruments that we have. And indeed, we see that. And even what we see is that essentially when you look at cash income from property, the entire planet, if you will, is, if you see a planet as an enterprise that is generating income from work, land that is here, and all the physical and material equipment that has been created, you essentially find that 1% of people, or even fewer, own basically 50% of the earth. And this is quite a striking finding, because you have actually about 90% of people have to work in order to survive. Then there is probably then about 9% of people who actually have to work and have some capital income. And then you have really that very small percentage, which actually runs below 1%, that actually owns the planet, or actually half of the planet. And this is a dramatic thing, actually, when you put it in that global framework.
Very good. So we're almost out of time. I think that this sentence of it's impossible not to care really represents what we're talking about. But let me ask you one final question from I'm on the shoes of a policymaker, which I am. And sometimes I wonder if within economics we have the right tools to really evaluate the redistributive consequences of policies that we have in place. I mean, we could have many examples, but how policies that are really in the agenda, such as migration policy, really affects capital gains versus labor, and within capital gains, how these are distributed across sectors or across the wealth distribution. I don't know if that's something that you also feel we need more research on.
I think we need to keep improving our statistics on inequality. Our economic statistics more broadly are always a work in progress, and any assessment of the effects of various public policies is going to rely on this data. And so that's why it's so important to invest resources in improving the way that we measure society and that we try to quantify the economy, and not only in its aggregate aspect, but also in how those macroeconomic aggregates are distributed across the population. And there's been progress over the last 10 years, for instance, with the development of what is known as distributional national accounts, trying to allocate the macroeconomic aggregates like GDP, national income, consumption, to the various deciles and centiles of the population, having statistics on inequality that are consistent with the national accounts, the macroeconomic aggregates. But all of that is still in its infancy. It has to be improved. What I discussed today, which is a little bit trying to do distributional national accounts, but for taxes, allocating the total tax payments by income group with a focus on the very top. The same, it has started over the last 4 or 5 years. We're just at the beginning. It's very important that those statistics be published and done not only by economists. It's too serious, it's too important to be left to academics. It has to be done by government institutions with the resources and the manpower to do this well in the long term. But there is progress, and this is going to continue.
Very good. So on this we will end. It's impossible not to care, and we need more breakthroughs like the distributional national accounts to really give policymakers tools to assess the redistributive consequences of all policies, because we really care and we really should be continuing to care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.